There is something happening in doctors' offices across the United States, across Europe, across every country where people are living longer but not necessarily living better. Something that is quietly, consistently going unnoticed. And it begins not with a meal at a fast food restaurant, not with a soda, not with a candy bar, but with a bowl of fruit sitting on a kitchen counter. Considered healthy, consumed daily, and for millions of adults over the age of 60, working against them in ways they would never suspect. I have been watching this pattern for a long time, long enough to recognize it not as coincidence, but as a clinical reality that most people are never told about. My name is Dr. Kenji, and I have spent decades practicing preventive medicine and studying longevity in some of the oldest populations in Japan. What I am about to share with you is not a theory. It is what I have observed, what the data confirms, and what most conventional health advice continues to ignore. The conversation around fruit has never been more confusing. On one side, you have the nutritionists who tell you to eat more of it. On the other, a growing body of clinical evidence showing that the same fruit that supported your metabolism at 35 may be quietly destabilizing it at 65. Not because fruit is bad, but because you are no longer the same biological system you were 30 years ago. Your liver processes fructose differently now. Your pancreas responds to sugar more slowly. Your cells have developed a different relationship with insulin, and most of the time, nobody tells you this until something has already gone wrong. What I want to do in this video is give you the specific information that changes the way you think about this. Not in a vague, general sense. Not with advice that applies to everyone the same way, but with a precise, medically grounded look at 5 fruits that I have seen cause problems, repeatedly in patients over 60, fruits that most of them were eating every single day without question, because everything they had ever been told assured them it was the right thing to do. We are going to talk about what happens inside your body when you eat these fruits after 60. We are going to look at the biology, the insulin response, the fructose pathway, the pancreatic load in terms that are clear and usable. And then we are going to look at what the oldest people I have ever studied actually eat instead. Because the answer, when you see it, is both simpler and more specific than most people expect. Stay with me through this entire video. The most important information is not at the beginning, it builds. Each fruit we discuss adds a layer to your understanding so that by the time we reach the end, you will not just know which fruits to reconsider, you will understand why, and that understanding is what makes the change permanent. Before we go further, if you have never been on this channel before, I want you to know what we do here. This is not a place for quick fixes or general wellness tips. Every video on this channel is built around one question. What do the data and the clinical experience of treating the oldest, healthiest populations on Earth actually tell us about how to live longer without disease? If that is the kind of information you want more of, subscribe now and make sure the notification bell is turned on. The people who follow this channel are the ones who want real information, and that is exactly what we deliver every single time. Let me start before the fruit, because to understand why these 5 specific fruits are a problem after 60, you first need to understand what changes inside your body as you age, and why those changes make sugar, even natural sugar, a completely different experience than it used to be. At 30, your pancreas is a responsive, efficient machine. You eat something sweet, a piece of fruit, a glass of juice, a handful of raisins, and within minutes, your pancreas detects the rise in blood glucose and releases insulin. The insulin acts like a key, unlocking your cells to receive that glucose. Your blood sugar rises, your cells respond, your blood sugar comes back down. The whole process in a healthy younger body happens quickly and cleanly. There is minimal residue. There is minimal strain. Your cells are sensitive to insulin, which means they respond to small amounts of it, and your pancreas does not have to work very hard. Now let me tell you what changes. By the time most people reach their late 50s and early 60s, something called insulin sensitivity begins to decline. This is not a disease. It is a physiological reality of aging that occurs in almost everyone to some degree. What it means practically is that your cells become less responsive to the insulin your pancreas produces. They do not open as easily. Glucose does not enter them as efficiently. And so your blood sugar stays elevated longer after a meal than it did when you were younger. Your pancreas, recognizing that glucose is still in the bloodstream, responds by producing more insulin. For a while, this compensation works. Your blood sugar eventually comes down. But the pancreas is under more strain than it used to be. And over months and years, that strain accumulates. The cells of the pancreas that produce insulin, the beta cells, can gradually become less effective. The system becomes less precise. And in the meantime, chronically elevated insulin levels create their own set of problems, including increased fat storage, systemic inflammation, and a cellular environment that accelerates aging. There is a second change that is equally important, and it involves a different organ entirely, the liver. Fructose, the specific type of sugar found in fruit, does not behave like glucose. It does not require insulin to enter cells. It bypasses that system entirely and goes directly to the liver for processing. 30, this is generally not a problem. Your liver is efficient, your cells are responsive, and fructose is metabolized without issue. But by 60, the liver has typically accumulated decades of metabolic load. Its processing efficiency has declined. And when it receives large quantities of fructose, especially from concentrated sources, it struggles to handle it in the same way it once did. The result is increased triglyceride production, increased fat accumulation in the liver itself, and a contribution to insulin resistance that compounds the problem already happening in your muscle cells and your adipose tissue. There is also a third factor, the speed of sugar absorption. As you age, the gut lining changes. Food moves through the digestive system differently, and concentrated sugars, the kind found in sweet fruits, especially when eaten alone on an empty stomach or in liquid form, can create a more rapid, more intense spike in blood glucose than the same food would have created years earlier. What this means is that a piece of fruit that your body handled effortlessly at 40 may now produce a blood sugar pattern that looks, on a continuous glucose monitor, almost identical to the pattern produced by a candy bar. Not because the fruit has changed, because you have. Because the system receiving that sugar is operating under different conditions with less tolerance, less flexibility, and less margin for the kind of concentrated fructose load that most sweet fruits deliver. This is the foundation. Everything that follows, every fruit we discuss, every clinical observation I share, is built on this biological reality. Age changes the game, and most people are still playing by the old rules. Now the question becomes, which specific fruits are causing the most damage? Let us start with the one I see most often on the breakfast tables of patients who come to me with blood sugar problems they cannot explain. It sits in fruit bowls across America. It appears in every nutritional guideline recommending a healthy breakfast. It is the fruit most people reach for first thing in the morning, often before they have eaten anything else. And for patients over the age of 60 who are struggling with blood sugar instability, fasting glucose elevation, and unexplained fatigue in the mid-morning hours, it is the fruit I find myself discussing more than any other. We are talking about the banana. The banana has built an extraordinary reputation for being wholesome, natural, and safe. And in certain contexts, for certain populations, that reputation is not entirely undeserved. Bananas contain potassium. They contain vitamin B6. They are filling, convenient, and affordable. For a 25-year-old athlete who needs fast energy before a training session, a banana serves a real physiological purpose. But after 60, the banana presents a specific problem that most people are never told about. And it begins with a number, the glycemic index. The glycemic index is a measurement of how quickly a food causes blood glucose to rise after consumption, on a scale from 0 to 100. Pure glucose scores 100. A ripe banana, the kind most people actually eat, the yellow, sweet, slightly spotted kind, scores between 62 and 72 depending on its exact ripeness. That places it solidly in the high glycemic category. To give you a frame of reference, white bread scores around 73. A ripe banana and a slice of white bread produce very similar blood glucose responses. Now add the aging metabolism to that picture. Remember what we just discussed: reduced insulin sensitivity, slower glucose clearance, a pancreas working harder to compensate. When a person over 60 eats a ripe banana on an empty stomach first thing in the morning, the fructose and glucose hit the bloodstream together, rapidly, with no other food to slow the absorption. The blood sugar rises quickly. The pancreas responds with a surge of insulin. The blood sugar drops, sometimes sharply. And within 90 minutes to 2 hours, that person is sitting at their kitchen table feeling tired, slightly foggy, and inexplicably hungry again. Most of them attribute it to not having slept well enough or to getting older or to something else entirely. They do not connect it to the banana they ate at 7 in the morning. There is another dimension to this that makes bananas specifically problematic for aging bodies, and it has to do with ripeness. A green or barely ripe banana contains significant amounts of resistant starch, a type of carbohydrate that is not rapidly digested, that feeds beneficial gut bacteria, and that produces a much slower, flatter blood glucose curve. As a banana ripens and turns yellow, that resistant starch converts progressively into simple sugars. By the time the banana is fully yellow with brown spots, which is exactly when most people consider it ideally ripe and sweet, it is at its highest glycemic impact. The food that might have been relatively benign when green has become something metabolically very different by the time it reaches your fruit bowl. In my clinical practice, I have seen this pattern play out in patients repeatedly. Someone comes in with mildly elevated fasting glucose. Their diet appears clean. They eat fruit every morning. They are walking, they are not consuming obvious junk. But there is a banana, often two, sitting at the center of their morning routine, and when we remove it, or replace it with a lower glycemic option, the change in their morning blood sugar readings is measurable within 2 weeks. What is the practical guidance here? If you are over 60 and you enjoy bananas, the single most important change you can make is timing. Do not eat a banana alone on an empty stomach. Pair it with a source of protein and fat, a handful of walnuts, a spoonful of almond butter, or 2 eggs alongside it. Protein and fat significantly slow the rate of glucose absorption, flattening the blood sugar curve. A banana that would spike your blood sugar by 40 or 50 points when eaten alone will produce a much more modest response when it is part of a mixed meal. The second adjustment is ripeness. If you can tolerate a slightly less sweet banana, firmer with a greenish tinge, you are eating a food that behaves metabolically more like a vegetable than a candy. The resistant starch content is higher, the glycemic impact is lower, and your pancreas will thank you for it. The third consideration is portion. Half a banana paired with protein in the context of a full breakfast is a fundamentally different metabolic event than a whole ripe banana eaten alone at 7 in the morning. Small changes in how you eat this fruit, not whether you eat it but how, can make a measurable difference in your daily blood sugar pattern. And for adults over 60, daily blood sugar pattern is one of the most important determinants of long-term health outcomes that most people are not paying nearly enough attention to. There is a fruit that has been marketed for decades as one of the most powerful natural health foods available. It appears in every juice aisle in every grocery store in America. It shows up in supplements, in health food stores, in detox regimens, and in the advice of well-meaning practitioners who recommend it for everything from urinary tract health to inflammation reduction. It is considered broadly to be a superfood, and for patients over 60 who are monitoring their blood sugar, it is a quiet source of sustained glycemic disruption that almost no one is talking about. The fruit is the grape, and specifically what I want to discuss is the way that grapes, particularly in their most common consumed forms, interact with aging metabolism in a way that the superfood narrative has completely obscured. Let us begin with the basic biochemistry. Grapes are predominantly sweetened by glucose and fructose in roughly equal proportions, with a total sugar content that is surprisingly high for a fruit that many people consider a healthy snack. A single cup of grapes, which is a very modest portion, the kind of amount most people would eat without thinking, contains approximately 23 grams of sugar. For comparison, that is more sugar than a glazed donut at some major chains. The glycemic index of grapes sits around 53 to 59, which places them in the moderate range, but the glycemic load, which accounts for the amount you are actually eating, is where the problem reveals itself. Glycemic load is a more clinically useful measurement than glycemic index alone, because it combines the quality of the sugar with the quantity consumed. A food can have a moderate glycemic index but a high glycemic load if you eat a large portion of it. And grapes are precisely this kind of food. Because they are small, sweet, and easy to eat passively. You reach into the bowl, you take a few, you keep talking, you reach again. Portion control is genuinely difficult. People eat far more grapes than they intend to, and the cumulative sugar load can be significant. But the issue with grapes goes beyond their sugar content. It involves what happens with that sugar specifically in an aging liver. Grapes are one of the highest fructose fruits available, and unlike glucose, fructose does not stimulate insulin release when it enters the bloodstream. This sounds positive. You might think that a sugar that does not trigger insulin would be safer. In reality, for aging metabolisms, it creates a different problem. Fructose goes directly to the liver, where it is metabolized independently of insulin. When the liver receives large amounts of fructose, which it increasingly struggles to process efficiently after 60, it converts a significant portion of that fructose into triglycerides. Elevated triglycerides are a marker of metabolic stress. They contribute to cardiovascular disease, they promote fatty liver disease, and they are associated with long-term insulin resistance. Now let me tell you about what Japanese clinical observation has shown us about grapes, specifically in elderly populations. Among patients I have followed over many years who maintain elevated fasting triglycerides alongside normal or near normal fasting glucose, grape consumption, especially in juice form, appears consistently in their dietary history. The juice form is particularly relevant. When grapes are juiced, you concentrate all of the sugar and remove virtually all of the fiber. Fiber is the primary mechanism that slows sugar absorption. Without it, grape juice delivers its entire fructose and glucose load to your system in a matter of minutes. And because it is liquid, it empties from the stomach almost instantly, producing a rapid spike that is significantly more intense than the same number of grapes eaten whole. I have had patients come to me with blood sugar graphs. From continuous glucose monitors they began wearing to understand their patterns, showing that a small glass of grape juice at breakfast produced a spike of 60 to 70 points above their baseline. This is a food they had been consuming every morning for years because it was fruit, because it was natural, and because nothing in their medical history had suggested it was a problem. If you are over 60 and grapes are a regular part of your diet, the most important changes are these. Eat them whole, never in juice form. Eat them as part of a meal that includes protein and fat, never alone as a snack. Limit the portion to a small handful, approximately 15 to 20 grapes, not a bowlful. And do not eat them in the late evening, when your body's capacity to process sugar is at its daily low. The grape is not a fruit you need to eliminate. It is a fruit you need to eat with precision, and for most people over 60, the way they currently eat it is anything but precise. This section is about a category of fruit consumption that is responsible for more blood sugar disruption, in my clinical experience, than almost any other single dietary pattern, and it involves not a fresh fruit you might recognize immediately, but the transformed versions of fruits that most people eat without realizing they are consuming something fundamentally different from the original food. We are talking about dried fruit, fruit juice, canned fruit and syrup, and the various processed and concentrated forms that fruits take when they move from their whole, natural state into the products that line supermarket shelves and kitchen pantries. And the specific fruit at the center of this section is one that appears in virtually every form I just described. Raisins, grape juice, canned peaches, dried apricots, dried cranberries, fruit leather, and every trail mix, granola bar, and health food snack product that uses fruit as a selling point. The central biological fact you need to understand is this. When you remove water from a fruit, you do not change the amount of sugar it contains. You only change the volume and weight. A quarter cup of raisins contains the same sugar as approximately 1.5 cups of fresh grapes. But the volume difference is enormous. You would never sit down and eat 1.5 cups of grapes in a single sitting at breakfast. You might very easily add a quarter cup of raisins to your oatmeal without thinking twice. And in doing so, you have delivered to your bloodstream a sugar load that is dramatically larger than you intended, concentrated into a small volume, without the water content that would normally slow gastric emptying and moderate absorption. Fiber content also changes in dried fruit, though not in the direction you might hope. Some fiber remains, but the concentration of sugar per gram increases so dramatically that the fiber-to-sugar ratio shifts decisively toward sugar. The glycemic impact of dried fruit is consistently and significantly higher than the same fruit in its fresh form. Raisins have a glycemic index of approximately 64. Fresh grapes have a glycemic index of around 55. That seems like a small difference until you account for the fact that you are almost certainly eating a larger effective sugar dose when the fruit is dried, simply because the portion looks small. The juice problem is even more pronounced. When fruit is juiced, the fiber is eliminated almost entirely. What remains is essentially flavored sugar water. Orange juice, which has been promoted as a health staple for generations, delivers approximately 21 grams of sugar in a standard 8-ounce glass, with virtually no fiber to moderate the absorption. Apple juice contains 24 grams of sugar in the same serving, again with negligible fiber. The glycemic response to these juices in a person over 60 is indistinguishable, in many cases, from the response produced by a carbonated soft drink. The liver receives the fructose load rapidly. The blood sugar spikes sharply. The pancreas responds with a significant insulin release. And then the familiar pattern follows: the crash, the fatigue, the hunger that returns before the next meal. I want to address something specific here about products that are marketed as health foods specifically to people in the 50 and over demographic. Dried cranberries appear constantly in salads marketed as heart-healthy. Dried apricots are promoted for their potassium content. Fruit and nut bars are sold in the health section of every grocery store with packaging designed to suggest that they belong in the same category as fresh vegetables. They do not. The sugar content of these products, when you look at the label, is frequently comparable to candy. The difference is that the sugar came from fruit, and somehow, in our collective nutritional understanding, that distinction has been allowed to carry far more weight than the actual metabolic impact warrants. For adults over 60, the practical guidance is absolute. Always choose whole, fresh fruit over any dried, juiced, or processed version of that fruit. The form of the food matters as much as the identity of the food. An apricot and a dried apricot are not the same food from the perspective of your aging metabolism. An orange and a glass of orange juice are not the same food. A grape and a raisin are not the same food. Treating them as equivalent is one of the most common and consequential mistakes I see in the dietary histories of patients who come to me with unexplained blood sugar dysfunction, patients who are eating, by every measure they are aware of, a clean and healthy diet. Now we arrive at the fruit that generates more confusion and disagreement than almost any other in the context of aging metabolism and blood sugar management. It is a fruit that doctors, nutritionists, and health advocates have been recommending for decades. It appears on lists of superfoods. It is promoted for its enzyme content, its digestive benefits, its anti-inflammatory properties, and its vitamin C concentration. It is a staple of beach destinations, tropical resorts, and health cafes around the world. And when patients over 60 who are managing blood sugar issues tell me they have been eating it every day because their previous doctor told them it was one of the healthiest things they could consume, I understand why they are confused. Because for many populations at many ages, that advice was not entirely wrong. The fruit is the mango. I want to be very precise about what I am saying here, because I am not claiming that mangoes are toxic or that they have no nutritional value. They do not lack nutritional value. Mangoes contain vitamin C, vitamin A, folate, and various polyphenol that have demonstrated anti-inflammatory properties in laboratory conditions. The problem is not with the nutritional profile of the mango in a broad sense. The problem is with its sugar concentration, its glycemic behavior, and the specific way that those factors interact with an aging metabolism that is already struggling to maintain glucose homeostasis. A single medium-sized mango, not a large one, a medium one, contains approximately 45 to 50 grams of sugar. To put that in perspective, that is more sugar than a can of Coca-Cola. The sugar in a mango comes predominantly from fructose and sucrose, with fructose making up a particularly significant portion. The glycemic index of mango sits around 51, which sounds moderate, but the glycemic load, accounting for the amount of sugar in a typical serving, is consistently high, and the fructose load is particularly relevant for aging livers. What I observe clinically is this: patients over 60 who eat mango daily, especially those who eat it as part of their morning routine or as a mid-afternoon snack, frequently show a pattern of postprandial blood glucose spikes that are disproportionate to what they expect. They are eating what they believe is a healthy food. They are experiencing blood sugar fluctuations that their physicians are beginning to monitor with concern. And when we trace the pattern, the mango appears consistently as a variable that, when modified, produces measurable improvement in their glucose readings. There is also a regional dimension to this that I think is important to acknowledge. In general population studies that inform most nutritional guidelines, the data often comes from a mix of age groups, fitness levels, and metabolic conditions. When you isolate the data to adults over 60, particularly those with any degree of insulin resistance, which by this age applies to a significant majority of the population, the picture changes. A food that is genuinely appropriate for a healthy 30-year-old with optimal insulin sensitivity may be genuinely problematic for a 65-year-old whose metabolic flexibility has diminished. The practical guidance for mango is not abstinence but precision. A small portion, approximately half a cup, not a full mango, consumed in the context of a meal that includes significant protein and fat, eaten at the time of day when insulin sensitivity is highest, which is typically midday, not morning and not evening, produces a substantially different metabolic outcome than a full mango eaten alone as a snack. The difference is not trivial. I have seen patients use continuous glucose monitors to compare these two eating patterns with the same fruit, and the glucose curve in the paired portion scenario is often less than half the amplitude of the curve produced by an unmodified consumption pattern. If mango is a fruit you love and do not want to eliminate, reduce the portion significantly, pair it always with protein, and move it from your morning routine to midday. These 3 adjustments alone can transform it from a blood sugar liability into something your body can manage. But it requires acknowledging that the unconditional recommendation to eat mango freely, which you may have received, which many people over 60 have received, was advice calibrated for a different metabolic age than the one you are in now. This is the last of the 5 fruits, and in some ways it is the most insidious, not because it is the highest in sugar, not because its glycemic index is the most extreme, but because of how thoroughly it has been embedded into the dietary culture of health-conscious adults in America and worldwide. This fruit does not appear on junk food. It does not appear in fast food restaurants. It appears in smoothies. It appears in acai bowls. It appears in fruit salads at upscale restaurants. It appears in every wellness-focused meal plan marketed to adults who want to take care of their health. It is considered a symbol of healthy eating, and it is quietly contributing to blood sugar dysregulation in a significant portion of the adults over 60 who are consuming it in the ways that modern health culture recommends. The fruit is the banana's tropical cousin in terms of sugar concentration, the date's sweeter competitor in terms of fructose load. Actually, let me be direct. I am talking about the fig and more broadly about the category of high fructose, high glycemic fruits that are dressed in the language of health food and consumed in large quantities, often in concentrated or combined forms, precisely because they carry a wellness halo that their actual metabolic impact does not support. But the primary fruit in this category that I want to focus on, the one that appears most consistently in the dietary histories of patients with unexplained blood sugar elevation in the senior age group, is the watermelon. Watermelon has one of the highest glycemic indexes of any commonly eaten fruit. The number is typically cited around 72 to 80, depending on the source. That places watermelon in the same glycemic territory as white bread and white rice. Now, you may have heard a counterargument to this that watermelon has a low glycemic load because of its high water content, and that you would have to eat an enormous amount of it to significantly impact your blood sugar. This argument has merit when applied to younger, metabolically flexible individuals. It loses much of its validity when applied to adults over 60 with reduced insulin sensitivity. Here is why. The glycemic load calculation assumes that you are eating a modest, standard portion. But watermelon is a fruit that is almost never eaten in small, measured portions. It is the summer fruit. It is the picnic food, the backyard barbecue staple, the large slice cut from a cold whole melon. People eat it in volumes that they would never apply to a denser, heavier fruit. And in those realistic portion sizes, 2, 3, for slices at a summer gathering, the glycemic load rises substantially. The fructose content accumulates. The blood glucose response in an aging metabolism is not moderate. There is a second issue, and it relates to context. Watermelon is frequently consumed in the exact settings where blood sugar management is most challenging. Outdoor events, afternoon heat, social occasions where the eating is casual and portion awareness is minimal. It is also commonly consumed alone, not as part of a meal with protein and fat, because its water content makes it feel light and standalone appropriate. This means that the fructose and glucose it delivers hit the bloodstream without the moderating influence of other macronutrients. The fructose metabolism pathway is where I want to spend a moment, because this is where the aging liver becomes specifically relevant. When fructose arrives at the liver in large quantities, the liver has limited capacity for its immediate use. A portion of it is converted to glucose and released into the bloodstream. A larger portion in an aging, metabolically stressed liver is converted to fat, specifically to triglycerides that are either stored in the liver itself contributing to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or released into the blood, contributing to cardiovascular risk. This is not a process that produces obvious symptoms. Your blood sugar reading 1 hour after eating watermelon may look unremarkable, while the fructose processing happening in your liver is producing metabolic consequences that accumulate over months and years. For adults over 60, the practical adjustment with watermelon and similar high glycemic fruits is portion discipline and pairing. A small, measured portion, genuinely small, not the culturally normalized large slice, eaten as part of a meal, not alone, in the middle of the day rather than in the evening, represents a fundamentally different metabolic event. If you are using a continuous glucose monitor, I encourage you to test your own response to watermelon in different conditions. What you observe may surprise you. Every conversation about what not to eat must eventually turn toward what to eat instead. And this is where I want to bring the evidence that has shaped my thinking more than any laboratory study or clinical trial, the actual eating patterns of the oldest, healthiest people I have ever had the privilege of studying, the elderly populations of certain regions of Japan where living past 90 in good health is not an anomaly, but a pattern that repeats with enough regularity to demand explanation. When you spend time with these populations, not as a tourist, not as an outside observer, but as a physician who is genuinely trying to understand the mechanisms behind their longevity, certain things become immediately obvious. The first is that they eat fruit. They have not eliminated it. They do not regard it as dangerous or forbidden. But the way they eat fruit is so different from the way fruit is consumed in most Western contexts that the comparison reveals something important. The quantities are small. Not small by comparison to some extreme standard, small in an absolute sense. A segment of a mandarin orange. 2 small slices of a persimmon. A few pieces of a small native variety of apple, consumed slowly, as part of a meal that already contains miso soup, fish, vegetables, and rice. Fruit is not the center of the meal. It is not the beginning of the meal. It is, if it appears at all, a small and considered addition at the end, and it is always, without exception, consumed alongside other foods. The fruits themselves are also specific. The ones I observe most consistently in the diets of healthy Japanese elders aged 90 and above are persimmon, small citrus varieties, blueberries and other small native berries, Asian pear, and green apple. What these fruits share from a metabolic perspective is instructive. They are all relatively low in total sugar. They are all high in fiber relative to their sugar content. And most of them are consumed in their whole, fresh form, never juiced, never dried, never processed into products that concentrate their sugars. Let me give you the specific metabolic argument for each of these. The persimmon, which is deeply embedded in Japanese dietary culture, has a glycemic index of approximately 50 and contains significant amounts of soluble fiber, particularly pectin, which slows gastric emptying and moderates the rate of glucose absorption. Small citrus varieties, mandarin oranges, yuzu, small clementines, deliver vitamin C, flavonoids, and hesperidin alongside a sugar load that is substantially lower per serving than tropical fruits, with fiber that helps moderate absorption. Blueberries are perhaps the most well-studied of this group from a Western clinical perspective, with consistent evidence showing that they improve insulin sensitivity, reduce postprandial glucose spikes, and support vascular health, with a glycemic index of approximately 53 and a sugar content that is modest relative to their nutritional density. Asian pear is particularly interesting because it is one of the highest fiber fruits available, with a flesh that is exceptionally high in water content and a sugar profile that produces a notably flatter blood glucose response than most other sweet fruits. Green apple, chosen specifically over the sweeter, more common red varieties, contains more malic acid and significantly more resistant starch in the flesh, with a lower sugar concentration and a higher fiber-to-sugar ratio. Now let me tell you about the timing patterns I observe. The oldest patients I study in Japan do not eat fruit in the morning. This runs counter to Western nutritional convention, which places fruit at breakfast as a matter of routine. But from a physiological standpoint, the morning is when cortisol levels are highest, cortisol being a hormone that naturally elevates blood glucose, which means that adding a sugar load at this time compounds an already elevated glucose state. The result is a higher, longer-lasting blood sugar spike than the same fruit would produce if eaten at midday, when cortisol has declined, insulin sensitivity is at its daily peak, and the body is in a better position to handle glucose efficiently. In practical terms, this means moving fruit consumption to lunchtime or early afternoon, always as part of a mixed meal with protein, fat, and fiber from other sources, and always in a portion that respects the metabolic reality of an aging body. Not a bowl of fruit, a serving of fruit, not fruit juice, whole fruit eaten slowly as part of a meal, not dried fruit, fresh fruit, preferably from the lower glycemic varieties. These are not dramatic restrictions. They are precise adjustments that reflect a more accurate understanding of what your body needs at this stage of life, and they are, based on everything I have observed across decades of clinical practice, exactly what the healthiest elders I have ever known are doing. We have now gone through 5 specific fruits, each with its own mechanism, its own clinical pattern, and its own practical adjustment. And I want to draw your attention to something that connects all of them, not as a summary of what was already said, but as a principle that, once you see it, changes how you evaluate every food decision going forward, not just the ones involving the 5 fruits we discussed today. The connecting logic is this. For adults over 60, the risk of any food is not determined solely by what that food contains. It is determined by the interaction between what the food contains and the specific metabolic state of the body that is receiving it. This seems obvious when stated directly, but the nutritional guidance that most people over 60 are receiving is not calibrated to this principle. It is calibrated to a population average, which includes people of all ages, metabolic conditions, and levels of insulin sensitivity, and then applied universally as though a 65-year-old and a 25-year-old have the same physiological relationship with fructose. They do not. All 5 of the fruits we discussed today are, in the context of a young, metabolically flexible person, largely harmless. The banana provides quick energy. The grape offers antioxidants. Dried fruit delivers concentrated micronutrients. Mango supplies vitamins and polyphenol. Watermelon provides hydration and lycopene. None of these facts are false. But facts about a food's nutritional content do not tell you how that food will behave inside a specific body at a specific stage of biological aging. The glycemic impact, the fructose load, the rate of absorption, the liver's processing capacity, the pancreatic response, all of these are variables that change with age. And the foods that were appropriate at one stage of your life may not be appropriate at the same dose, in the same form, and at the same time of day at another. The second unifying principle is cumulative load. No single piece of fruit consumed on a single morning will destroy a healthy metabolism. The problem is not the individual event. It is the pattern. It is the ripe banana every morning for years. It is the grape juice with breakfast every single day. It is the half a mango as the daily afternoon snack, consumed alone, without protein, in the early morning hours when cortisol is already elevating blood glucose. These patterns accumulate. They maintain a chronic, low-grade state of blood sugar instability that does not announce itself loudly, but that produces, over time, the conditions under which insulin resistance deepens, the pancreas becomes less effective, and the metabolic trajectory moves in a direction that is very difficult to reverse once it has progressed far enough. The third principle, and this is the one I want to leave you with as a frame for everything that follows in this video, is that precision is more powerful than restriction. The people I have described who live past 90 in good metabolic health in Japan are not people who have eliminated fruit. They are people who have developed, through cultural transmission and lived experience, a precise relationship with food. They eat the right fruits in the right amounts, in the right forms, at the right times, alongside the right other foods. The precision is the medicine, and precision, unlike restriction, is something you can sustain. It is something that does not require deprivation. It only requires knowledge, accurate, specific, biologically grounded knowledge about what your body actually needs at the stage of life you are in right now. That is what the rest of this video is going to give you. What you have just heard is not the complete picture. It is the foundation. The 5 fruits, the biological mechanisms, the patterns observed in the oldest and healthiest populations in Japan. This is the beginning of a conversation that changes how you think about nutrition after 60. Not just fruit. Food, timing, metabolic load, and the daily habits that determine whether the decade ahead of you looks like the gradual decline that most people accept as inevitable or something considerably different. If this video has caused you to look at your morning routine differently, if it has raised questions about what you are eating and why, and if you want the continuation of this conversation, the deeper evidence, the specific protocols, the eating patterns that correlate with longevity in the populations I have studied, then the most important thing you can do right now is subscribe to this channel. Every video we publish is built on the same standard. No generalities, no motivational messaging, no advice designed to be easy rather than accurate. Only what the evidence actually shows, applied specifically to the bodies and the lives of adults who want more good years, not just more years. Subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with someone over 60 who is still eating fruit every morning without knowing what it is doing to their blood sugar. You might change something important for them. That is what this is here for.